ambassador riding in Lutyens' Delhi. Quite an extraordinary sight. But the envoy of Indonesia to India, Sidharto Suryodipuro, is an avid biker. He came to India 2 years ago. Has his journey been smooth or littered with speed breakers? We met Siddhartho Suryodipuro and talked to him about his India experiences, the ties between the two countries, and the manner in which Indonesia is dealing with its regional and global challenge.
Welcome to the Diplomacy Show. Our focus today is on Indonesia. The 10th largest economy in the world in terms of purchasing power parity. The 4th largest in terms of population size, with a population of about 260 million people. The country with the largest population of Muslims in the world. (17,500 islands). More than 6.4 million square kilometers of maritime territory. The largest country in ASEAN, an important tourist destination, straddling the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. Indonesia is also a country with very strong traditional links with India. Trade, culture, religion. We are joined today by Indonesia's Ambassador to India, Ambassador Sidharto Suryodipuro. Ambassador Sidharto Suryodipuro, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Sidharto, you've been in India now for about 2 years. What has been your experience in India? What are the impressions you've formed?
Well, for one thing, because I came from Washington, D.C., I was the Deputy Chief of Mission there. Mm-hmm. So my very first impression coming to India, arriving in New Delhi in the morning, was the familiarity, how very much it looked like home. In the streets, the way people behave, it was in July, so it was humid. It very much felt like home, and in fact it wasn't too far from home. So I feel, until today, my wife and I, we feel very much at home.
Looking at your personal impressions and role, I noticed that you have a Royal Enfield. So how did you relate to a Royal Enfield, and what are you using it for?
Well, after 27 years not being on a motorbike, coming here and listening in the streets of the Enfield thumping sound, I couldn't resist. So November last year, I got myself one. The CEO of Royal Enfield, Siddharth, he helped me with that. So it was a bit of custom made in coloring. I've ridden it around Chanakya Puri. I went to South Block. I haven't gone any further than that. But I would like to join clubs here. People have been talking a lot about riding motorbikes in Ladakh. So it's something that I must do while I'm in India.
Well, we're looking forward to your exploring India on a motorbike, perhaps accompanied by some friends. During your stay here, have you also had the occasion to travel to different parts of India? What are the places you visited? What are your takeaways from those visits?
Yes, I've traveled. I've been there to Andamans already, I think 3 or 4 times. I've been to Orissa also 3 or 4 times. Kolkata, Chennai, I've visited a few times. These are all for work. But I try to insert a bit of sightseeing. I always have my wife with me. My wife, her name is Devi Ratna. So she's, most of the time she's with me. But I've also taken some time off to go. I visited Uttarakhand a few times, to the Mukteshwar area. A few weeks ago, we traveled by train to Amritsar.
Well, you're seeing different parts of India then. And I just wanted to take the conversation a bit to the bilateral relationship. I recall that in 1948, when Indonesia was still dealing with the challenge of colonialism and Dutch colonialism, at that time an important Indian leader, Mr. Biju Patnaik, later the Chief Minister of the state of Odisha, had taken a secret flight to Indonesia to evacuate one of the leaders of the movement for national independence to protect him from Dutch colonial attacks. So how do people in Indonesia recall that incident and the role that an Indian leader had played at that time?
Yes, Indonesia declared its independence in 1945, and we had a period of independence war for about 4 years. So it was, India was a steady supporter of Indonesia's independence. So the government of India of the time supported us in the United Nations. It hosted the first Asian Relation Conference in which some of our leaders came and spoke. So India played a very big role in mobilizing international support, including in the United Nations in New York. And there was a period when Indonesia was undergoing Dutch blockade during this independence war, that the government of India, Prime Minister Nehru, asked his friend Biju Patnaik to fly to Indonesia to bring one of his leaders to India, to fly through the Dutch blockade. So Biju Patnaik, he's not only a hero in India, he's also a hero in Indonesia. In 1995, when we celebrated 50 years of independence, we accorded to him one of the highest heroes medals for his role during our independence war.
Ramayana and Mahabharata are also very important parts of Indonesia's cultural traditions. So could you share with us from your perspective what are the role that these traditions have played and continue to play in Indonesia?
These are so, Ramayana and Mahabharata, that's how we say it, it's so much ingrained in our culture. You come to Indonesia, Jakarta or Bali or other parts, you will see very much this is part of the Indonesian heritage. So we, it's so much ingrained in our culture.
I recall that when the Indian Prime Minister Modi had gone to Indonesia in May 2018,
yes.
He had, along with your president, also visited the statue of Arjun.
Yes. Yes.
And so that again is certainly a marker of the role and recognition of that tradition. And also that during that visit, he and the President of Indonesia had participated in an event where there was joint flying of kites,
yes.
Based on Ramayana and Mahabharata. Can you tell us something about that?
Kites are part of both of our cultures in India as well as Indonesia. So this initiative was made. So not only it showed the sharing of both cultures, but I was there, and it was very, I found very interesting that our leaders, they actually had a good time. And I think both of them individually, it somehow rekindled memories from their childhood. They were actually having a lot of fun flying it. Before, of course, their responsibility as statesmen had to come in.
In Indonesia, it is said that the phrase Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, unity in diversity, is often cited. And in India also we cite that phrase, and also the phrase Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family. So what does this unity in diversity mean for Indonesia?
It's the very foundation of our nationhood, of the Indonesian Republic. It is on this basis, beginning in 1928, when the youth from various parts of what is today Indonesia came together and they made a promise that they will form an Indonesian nation, they will use the Indonesian language, and they will form one country, Indonesia. And this is the very basis of it. If you look at the makeup, the ethnic makeup of Indonesia, about half of the population is Javanese, from Java. And yet our language is not Javanese, it's Indonesian language. And it is only by this way accommodating everybody in a republic that is, we have the belief in one God as one of the foundation of the republic. But at the same time, it's not run as on the basis of any one religion.
Although there have been a lot of similarities, as we discussed, between India and Indonesia, sharing of cultural, historical traditions, working together in the context of struggle against colonialism, and even after that, through the non-aligned movement, the Group of 77. And although the distance between Delhi and major Indian cities and Indonesia seems to be far, over several hours of flying, between the tip of Andaman and Nicobar Islands to Indonesia, it's only about 80 nautical miles.
Yes.
So we are very, very close. But somehow there is a sense that after the independence of both our countries, the relationship didn't really evolve in a very substantive way or with the pace that it should, given the fact that on 26 January 1950, when India adopted its constitution, the first chief guest on India's Republic Day ever was the President of Indonesia. So how do you explain the fact that there is a sense that the bilateral relationship for a long time was seen more as having potential rather than realization?
Yes, it's very true what you're saying. In fact, Indonesia is India's second largest neighbor after China. India is Indonesia's largest neighbor. And yet not very much is, well, that's not fair. I would say that a lot more potentials can be realized. Now for a bit of time, we were looking elsewhere. We have a different regional outlook. But I think in the past few years, this has changed, even changed in a big way. The world is changing. We want to ensure that the global trading norms remain open. We want to make sure that in our region, in the Indo-Pacific region, the norms, the architecture that is open, inclusive, rule-based, it is maintained, even strengthened.
Of late, I see that both countries seem to be making a determined effort to improve the relationship. In 2011, the President of Indonesia was the chief guest again at India's Republic Day. In 2018, President of Indonesia was here along with other heads of state and government of ASEAN for the Indo-ASEAN commemorative summit on the occasion of our Republic Day. And the Indian Prime Minister visited Indonesia in May 2018. I noticed that now there is the first security dialogue that has been started. There's a defense dialogue at the level of ministers, and we've had 2 rounds of that. There's a group on looking at defense cooperation. And now both countries are also looking at joint development in and around the port of Sabang and building maritime connectivity, tourism between Sabang and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So how do you explain all this, and how do you assess the efforts that have been made so far?
In January, last January, we had the first ship coming from North Sumatra, from Aceh, come to Port Blair. They brought exhibitional goods. These included construction materials, agricultural products, handicraft, and a host of others. It's meant as an exhibitional products based on the discussion among the 2 chambers of commerce, Chamber of Commerce of Andamans and its counterparts in Aceh. So after that, they discuss with each other. So we hopefully we'll see contract signs, deals made, and then more goods being transferred between the two. Like you said, it's very close by. We are interested also to have Indian companies invest in the development of the Sabang port, because Sabang is at the very end of the Indonesian archipelago. It's at the entrance of the Malacca Strait. But more importantly, that part of Indonesia and India, the Andamans, is at the very center of the Bay of Bengal. Now, the way I look at Bay of Bengal, it is you take out the history of colonialism. Now we are seeing a more natural development of relationship. And the Bay of Bengal we will see that in the Bay of Bengal, where interaction among the littoral states will develop, will progress in a more meaningful way.
No, you're quite right, because the colonial domination had disrupted the traditional linkages and the flow of people and trade and ideas. So after the independence of all our countries, we've had to revive that in a sense. And this year, 2019, marks 70 years of establishment of diplomatic relations between India and Indonesia. And from what I see, large number of events were organized to commemorate this. So can you share with us what kind of events were done and your assessment of how it all proceeded?
Well, one of the first events we had was Khadi Batik fashion show. So based on Khadi made well, of course it's India, we sent to Indonesia, and then the Batik method was applied to it, and then it was brought here by Indonesian designers. It was made into fashion clothing with Indian models. So we had that. This was sometime in March. So Khadi Batik, not only because of the mix of between material and method, but because in both cases also they played a very large role in the forming of our nationals, our nationalism. Khadi, but also Batik in Indonesia. Now we are having some chefs, Indonesian chefs, come here to celebrate. So we'll be serving Indonesian food that Indians will be very familiar with.
Yes, and I know that Indonesia is a very important tourist destination, not just from people all over the world, but also a large number of people from India. And many of them, of course, going to Bali, the temples there. And so I'm sure with the effort you make, the numbers will perhaps increase even further.
Yes, yes.
The other aspect I wanted to discuss with you was going beyond just the bilateral. Recently, an India, Indonesia, Australia trilateral dialogue has been started. What is the thinking behind that?
We had the trilateral dialogue going back a few years. It began as the trilateral dialogue in the Indian Ocean, TDIO. I was in Jakarta at the time also doing this. It was track 1.5. So we had also think tanks. The idea was how to strengthen cooperation between these three countries in the Indian Ocean. How to strengthen the norms and institutions of the Indian Ocean. And of course, consequently or sequentially to that was we hold the IORA chairmanship. It was India and Australia and then Indonesia. And now at the senior official level, we are having this. I think we've had already twice of such a dialogue. The thinking is to strengthen cooperation in the Indian Ocean, but also to strengthen cooperation in a broad way.
So when you speak of the India, Australia, Indonesia trilateral and sort of looking at cooperation in a broad way, one naturally thinks of the Indo-Pacific. And there's a lot of discussion these days about the Indo-Pacific. What does the concept mean? What are the kind of architectures of security? What should be the rules governing the maritime and other aspects related to the Indo-Pacific? Recently, ASEAN came out with a document outlining its approach to the Indo-Pacific. So what does the Indo-Pacific mean for Indonesia, including in the framework of the ASEAN?
Well, first, for Indonesia itself, Indonesia as a country, Indo-Pacific is a natural evolution of its foreign policy. It used to be just Southeast Asia, and then about 20, 30 years ago, we developed our policies for our Pacific neighborhood. And about 15 years ago, we started looking at developing our policy for our Indian Ocean neighborhood. So this, we are, for Indonesia, we are developing a complex foreign policy for a complex neighborhood, just like I'm sure India does the same.
One of the things that ASEAN countries are trying to do is talk to China and work out a code of conduct related to the South China Sea. And there seem to be differences related to ownership in the South China Sea, the maritime boundaries, ownership over islands. And even with Indonesia, I understand there are differences related to the Natuna Islands and the Chinese claims. So what is your assessment as to how is this dialogue progressing in terms of preventing one country's security domination or arriving at a common understanding of the way forward?
Well, there are two elements to your question. The first is about the code of conduct itself. So this year, ASEAN and China, they are looking forward to concluding the first reading of common text. And we hope that it can be adopted not long after. Secondly, you talked about Natuna and its surrounding waters. Now, Natuna is recognized as an Indonesian territory. There's no dispute on that. And as far as we are concerned, so are its surrounding waters, including the exclusive economic zone. Let me tell you that all countries in the region, we profess the UN Convention of Law of the Sea as governing our conduct. So on that basis, there is no claim over Indonesian waters.
The economic and military rise of China is inevitably posing a challenge to the surrounding countries and the region. And now there is the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yes.
I noticed that at the second round of the Belt and Road Forum in April this year, Indonesia signed 23 MOUs for cooperation. So how is Indonesia looking at the Belt and Road Initiative and the kind of challenges that other countries have described in terms of lack of transparency, debt unsustainability? How are you addressing that?
Well, China is an important partner in our infrastructure development. We want a constructive relationship. We are working with our Chinese friends precisely on that. For us, it is more of a business-to-business relationship. So any kind of, we don't have any mechanism that would ensure government guarantees. So no territories are involved in that. But coming to the broader question of Indo-Pacific also, many countries have many schemes for infrastructure development. China has this Belt and Road. Japan has its mechanism, including for investment and funding. India has, many countries have. Now, through the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Outlook and its platform of the East Asia Summit, where everybody sits at the same table, it is our expectation then that we can start to discuss how to harmonize these various kind of schemes for infrastructure cooperation. At least, even if we cannot harmonize, at least we know what the other is doing. So we have a broader understanding, because the economic benefit of Indo-Pacific is huge.
For some time, Indonesia was dealing with the challenge of terrorism. There were large number of terrorist attacks, many people killed. But it seems that with effort, Indonesia has been able to push back on that. What has enabled Indonesia to show success in dealing with this terrible challenge which is really afflicting the whole world?
Well, for one, we have the preventing terrorism. De-radicalization is important. To do that, we go into understanding of deeper understanding of religion. We draw on our long history and strong tradition of pluralism, of tolerance, of moderation, so we draw on that. So that's the soft side. But the hard side is we develop, we expand our capabilities in terms of intelligence and in terms of hardware, how to prevent, how to fight, how to arrest potential terrorists before they can realize their...
Between 1993 and 96, Indonesia was chair of the non-aligned movement. And you yourself were working in the office of the chairman of the non-aligned movement at that time. So from your personal perspective there, what did you see as the challenges that NAM was facing and some of the important decisions and highlights of the work that was being done at that time?
This was in the early 90s, first half of the 90s. The world had just come out of the Cold War. The developing countries were finding ways how to deal with the new world. And also for organizations like the non-aligned movement, also finding its way. Where is it that it can add value? Because Cold War is no more, one of the basis of the non-aligned movement. So we came to the realization that NAM should also talk more into livelihood of people. And one of the ideas that Indonesia pursued was about the debt of the developing countries. So for the first time ever that the chairman of the NAM was invited to meet with the chairman of the G7 to talk about the global economic situation, to talk about the debt problem and finding ways forward.
Yes, I remember I was also assigned in New York at that time, and there was a lot of focus shifting to economic issues, social issues, and the fact that although we don't have a bipolar world, maintaining the autonomy of decision making for the smaller countries,
Yes.
The developing countries, the non-aligned countries was a very important aspect in the new situation. So Siddharth, I wanted to thank you very much for sharing your perspectives related to your personal experience in India, the new relationship being built on the base of the old traditional patterns of exchange between India and Indonesia, as well as the regional and global challenges that Indonesia is facing. So I wish you success in your work. You've completed 2 years in India, but wish you many, many years of even more successful work.
Thank you, Arun. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining the show.
Happy to be here.